It's a shocking fall from grace in less than a year. P. Diddy went from beloved music icon to disgraced sexual predator, at least according to the charges from the feds. Right now, he's behind bars in New York, the same place where just last year he was given a key to the city. It was a disturbing set of allegations that led to Diddy's arrest in the way of multiple civil suits brought by accusers. And in some of those suits, co-defendants are listed, and in other celebrities, could it be a time of reckoning for them too? We're taking a deep dive into all the celebrities listed in Diddy's civil lawsuit and whether they too could face federal charges. I'm Sierra Gillespie, and this is Law&Crime News, a groundbreaking case brought forth just this week. When 54-year-old Shad Diddy Combs was arrested on September 15th, he now faces some pretty serious federal charges: racketeering, conspiracy, trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, and transportation to engage in prostitution. Did was indicted by a federal grand jury and is now being held in Brooklyn at the Metropolitan Detention Center after he was twice denied bail. Diddy's attorneys say he was in New York for about a week before the arrest, anticipating the federal indictment. But he wasn't the only one who kind of saw this coming after federal investigators raided two of Diddy's homes back in March. We kind of had an idea something was on the way just this week. We learned some of the items that investigators collected during those raids of Diddy's homes in both Miami and Los Angeles. According to the indictment against Diddy, investigators seized more than 1,000 bottles of baby oil and lubricants from his homes. The court states that these items were used in something referred to as freak-offs, which were elaborate and produced sex performances that Combs arranged, directed, masturbated during, and often electronically recorded. According to prosecutors, Diddy and his associates transported commercial sex workers over state lines, and even international. Diddy then allegedly gave these sex workers and victim-controlled substances, at times unannounced to the victims. Prosecutors say Diddy did this to keep the victims obedient and compliant. He then took videos of victims having sex with these
Present,
sex workers,
and no longer
sometimes
has a
without
voice
their
who will
consent.
pursue
After all
justice for
this,
her
both
accusation.
Diddy and the victims would receive
As of the
IV
taken
fluids
against
and
Diddy,
recover from the
no
physical
expansion of the
exertion and drug
investigation,
use. Federal
no isolation
investigators say
orders,
that during the
no
raids of
equipment
Diddy's
access,
homes, they
no
collected some
suspension
of
of
these
attorney
recordings, showing the
communication.
disturbing
Everything
details of these
inside
freak-offs,
solitary
and the
block
feds
C
had a
continued
heads
as
up about these
before.
recordings,
Everything
thanks to some
except
of
the
civil
fear.
lawsuits filed
If a
against
female
Diddy,
warden
namely
can
the
vanish
one
after
brought
a
by
single
Rodney
note, nothing
Jones,
except the
also known
fear.
as the
If a
producer
female
Lil
warden
Rod.
can vanish
Lil
after
Rod
a
worked
single
with
note,
Diddy on his
ones
Love
who
album
once worked
starting in
overnight in that
2022,
area,
and says
the
he
ones who
experienced
filed
months
for
of
leave
abuse,
without giving
all
a
at the hands
reason,
of Diddy
the
in
ones
his
who
lengthy
saw
civil
but never
suit. Lil
spoke.
Rod
No
refers
one
to these
mentions the
recording,
note,
saying,
but
quote,
everyone knows it
Mr.
appeared.
required Mr.
And if what
Jones,
it says is
that's Lil
true,
Rod, to
the
record him
punishment.
constantly.
Part
Mr.
3.
Jones has
The person
secured
no
hundreds
longer
of
in the
hours of
system.
footage
The
and
internal
audio
personnel
recordings
database of
Mr.
the
Combs,
Atlanta
the
Federal
staff,
Detention
and his
Center
guests
updated its
engaging
weekly
in some
roster.
serious
Under
legal
the
activity.
category Special
Lil Rod's
Personnel
lawsuit
Code
also
Adjustment,
lays out some
the
other
name
pretty
of Warden
disturbing
TD
claims,
was
like
marked
that
as removed
Diddy
from
sexually
system
assaulted
by
him and
administrative
forced Lil
order.
Rod to
There
have
was no
sex with a
decision number
prostitute,
recorded,
but
but
Lil
was
Rod's lawsuit
deactivated.
came out swinging
Her
in
personal
more ways than
contact
one. Not only
information
did it shed
disappeared
light
from
on
the
the dark
internal network
allegations against
exactly
Diddy,
36
but it dropped
hours
some
after she
high-profile
filed her
celebrity
complaint.
names too.
The
First,
changelog
there's
was
Academy
executed from the
Award-winning actor
system's
Cuba
highest
Gooding Jr.
access
Lil
level
Rod
server,
alleges
a
Diddy was,
device
quote,
bearing the
grooming him to
identifier
pass him off to his friends.
DCCA1,
This fear
located
became
in the
reality
coordination
when Mr.
office on the
Combs
4th floor of the
introduced Mr.
Security
Jones, Cuba
Administration
Gooding
Wing.
Jr. while they were on Mr.
Only
Combs'
2
yacht.
individuals
The
possess the
lawsuit
authority
includes
to
pictures
perform
of
a
this too,
system-level
showing both
personnel
Diddy with
removal at
Cuba
that tier,
and then
the
Cuba
head
with
of
his
Federal
arms
Human
around Lil Rod.
Resources
Court does
and
go on to
Detention
say,
Center.
quote, Cuba Gooding
No
Jr.
confirmation
began touching,
exists
groping,
as
and
patient was
fondling
made.
Mr. Jones's
The removal
legs,
of
his
Warden
upper inner
TD's
thighs,
name
near
was
his
not
groin,
accompanied by
in the
any
small of his
or
back,
protective
near his buttocks,
reassignment.
and his
At
shoulders. He
11:20
rejected his
a.m., a
advances,
printed copy
and
of the
Mr.
personnel
Gooding Jr. did
deployment
not
chart
stop
was
until
generated
Mr.
in
Jones
preparation for
forcibly
the new
pushed him
week's
away.
schedule.
Here's former
Under the
prosecutor
section
Melba
marked
Pearson.
Internal
In the
Alert,
last couple of
TD's
years,
name
there were allegations against him for sexual assault, so now we had those prior allegations, and now we see him tied to this case as allegedly trying to, assault a little or assault others back in 20 on misdemeanor charges of forcible touching and sexual abuse. After allegedly groping a woman in Times Square, by the next year, 3 women had come forward accusing him of non-consensual sexual touching. He eventually reached a plea deal with prosecutors that required 6 months of counseling. Jail time just this summer. He appeared on Dan Abrams Live, where he discussed those charges when he pleaded guilty to a forcible touching misdemeanor in 2022. Eventually led to a guilty plea of a lesser charge. A year later, he settled a federal civil lawsuit, 2 more civil misconduct lawsuits. Can you understand why some would say, don't want to cast this guy? Sure, but I can also understand some people who come up to me in the street all the time and yell, show me the money, and say, hang in there. And I see what you're going through. You make movies for an audience of people, right? Right now, I'm making a movie for faith-based people who are excited to renew our hope in humanity, especially the times we're in, dealing with politics and the world issues that are going on. So that's where I am now. And have you expressed regret, sorrow, apologies for what happened previously? Everything that happens in my life is for a reason. I believe that. And if I continue to walk on my path, whatever that is, I know at the end result, it'll be to make me stronger, to be a better person, to be a better father, and right now, that's the moment I'm in. Back to Melba says it's possible that charges could be brought against the actor. I am getting the feeling where there's smoke, there's fire, right? Because now we have two different instances where you're accused of the same type of behavior, years apart. I think there's something there, and I don't that Cooper Jai Jr.
Will
is
leave you
going to escape
speechless.
from that
When the
one
first
because
images
he
from the
already
federal
saw
raid on
definitely
Diddy's $40
people
million
moving away from
Los
him
Angeles estate
within
were released,
Hollywood
no one
circles and
expected
other
this.
circles once
Neatly
those
stacked
first
in
sexual
display
assault
cabinets like
allegations
prized
came out.
possessions were
So at this
200
point,
bottles
I
of
don't
baby
think he's
oil.
going to
Right next to them,
get away with
over
it a
900
second
bottles of
time.
lubricant. Rows and
It's
rows.
possible that he
It
could
looked
face
less like a
charges
home
based
and
on
more
these
like a
allegations
warehouse for
that were
something
brought
far
forward
more
by Lil
disturbing.
Rod. It
These
is
weren't the kind of
possible as
items most
well.
people keep in bulk,
Again,
but for
we've got the
investigators,
statute
it
of
painted a
limitations
chilling
issue
picture.
to
Why would
deal
one of the
with.
most
So,
powerful men in
depending on
hip-hop
the
need
time
this
frame
much?
of when this
And more
happened,
importantly,
is
what exactly were they
again
used
the
for?
Adult Survivors Act,
It
which was the
started with a
vehicle
knock,
where
then a
many
battering
these
ram.
lawsuits came
On a
out
quiet
when,
morning in
if
March
these civil law school
2024,
suits,
Homeland Security agents
came out
stormed
there,
Sean Diddy
there was a
Combs'
thin
LA
out
mansion in the
amount
elite
of time
neighborhood
for
of Palm
those
Beach
suits to
Hills.
be filed.
Not long
The
after,
time frame
another
is
team
going
hit
to
his
be very,
Miami
very
property on the
important.
glitzy Star
What
Island.
witnesses come
These
forward
weren't
because
just casual
again,
searches, these were
this
federal raids
this
with
may not be a
helicopters overhead,
situation
agents
where
in full
DNA
tactical
may
gear,
be at
and
play.
entire
This may
blocks
be
on
more of a
lockdown. What
situation
were they
of,
looking
hey,
for?
yes, I was
That
there
question
and
didn't
I
stay
recall,
unanswered for long. Inside the
Cuba
sprawling
Jennings Jr.,
17,000
putting
square foot
his hands on
mansion,
the L Rod,
agents uncovered
or
a scene that left even
recall
seasoned
certain
investigators
aspects.
allegedly planned
So it's
and
going to
controlled the
be a
sex
very
performance
witness
series,
intensive type
which
of
he
case.
called
And the
Kickoffs.
question is, will
And
witnesses
he
be
often
willing to come
electronically
forward?
recorded them.
Another high
The few
profile name
bottles,
listed
we're
in
talking
Lil Rod's
hundreds.
lawsuit
It looked
is
less like a
Jennifer Lopez. From the standpoint of the names of the celebrities that were tied to this, the fact that Jennifer Lopez was tied to this back when she was involved in or party to a shooting at a nightclub when she was dating Diddy, and is now alleged to have brought the gun with her to the scene and gave it to Diddy, and that's how the shooting occurred. Lil Rod's team brings up J-Lo when establishing Diddy's history, writing his quote, Rico enterprise has existed for at least dating back to the 1999 nightclub shooting in NYC when Mr. Colmes required his then girlfriend, Jennifer Lopez, to transport his illegal firearm into the NYC nightclub. The court do also allege Diddy forced his then artist Shine to assume responsibility for the shooting of several individuals. Shooting happened on December 27th, 1999 at about 2:55 a.m. A fight broke out at a nightclub in New York City between Diddy Jamal Barrow, who's known as the rapper Shine, and Matthew Allen, who went by the nickname Scar. Guns were drawn, and 3 people were shot. No one suffered any life-threatening injuries, and the victims were not involved in the fight. J-Lo and Diddy fled from the scene in a car, but were later arrested and charged. J-Lo's charges were dropped, but the others stuck. Diddy was acquitted, but Shine was sentenced to 10 years in prison. He was released in 2009 and deported back to his home country of Belize. Lil Rod alleges it was Diddy who pulled the trigger, and Shine just took the fall for him because of this allegation. Experts like former FBI agent Bobby Chone say investigators could take a second look at the shooting if there's a civil lawsuit that lays out this major allegation. What would it take to reopen an investigation into something that happened 25 years ago? Well, it would take, it would take a different look at it. So, in other words, he was acquitted on the state murder charges. Now, federal charges can be different. You can have RICO, you can have a continuing criminal enterprise, you can have, so the underlying acts, the predicate acts, if we used to call them when I worked RICO cases, a RICO predicate act could be something like that 1999 case, and you can use it as a predicate act. You can bring it up, when I worked cold cases of this type, sometimes with the passage of time, people aren't as intimidated and they're not as threatened, and they get away from the person who is the threat.
and they feel more forthcoming to testify or to give statements in testimony. But certainly, I think that that case is going to be part of it. In the aftermath of that, they have witnesses that say he bragged about intimidating witnesses, paying off jurors. Certain when you have that kind of stuff, if you go back and you find that juror that was paid off, or jurors multiple that may have been paid off, certainly that gives you the impetus to kind of come forward and refresh those charges on a federal case. So the federal cases will be a little different. The charges are a little different. So it's not double jeopardy. And so I think that that case that you mentioned, that you cite, I think is certainly one of the ones they're looking to build into a much bigger, to me, maybe a RICO type case. We also know that federal investigators have spoken to other plaintiffs in civil cases against Diddy to learn more about his personality and what he's like in relationships. That means J-Lo is someone the feds will want to talk to if they haven't already. It also means she could be called to testify against him. It's possible. It's absolutely possible. If I was the prosecutor handling that case, I absolutely would list right. But of course, we need to know whether or not she'd be cooperative. That, of course, changes the strategy when it comes to trial. So you may list someone as a potential witness. That does not mean you're necessarily going to call them. The question is whether or not testimony is really going to help you. But there is a universe where she could testify against him in terms of, violence, in terms of his interactions with other artists, especially the folks that have been coming forward alleging that he has harmed them in some way or engaged in, human trafficking and sex trafficking. So was she aware of any of that going on? Did she see him with underage girls, or was she present for when some of those videos were taken? That little Rodden, included screenshots of those videos in his pleadings. So how much of that did she know? When did she know it? And what actions did she take at the time? Is that part of the reason why they broke up? We don't know. So all of this will to be seen. Obviously, the prosecution and law enforcement need to speak with her, get a statement from her to understand what she knows or what she'd be able to testify to, and then make appropriate decisions from there. But it's not just artists that Lil Rod named either. He specifically mentioned Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, in talks. It reads in part, quote, Mr. Colmes was known for throwing the best parties. Affiliation with and/or sponsorship of Mr. Colmes' sex trafficking parties garner legitimacy and access to celebrities such as famous athletes, political figures, artists, musicians, and international dignitaries like British Royal Prince Harry. Why even name Prince Harry? There's no allegations against him or anything, but why bring him up? I think it may have been a move to bring more credibility to the filing and say that, basically he being Diddy was using his fame, fortune, and influence to insulate himself. So he was able to legitimize some of the activities he was doing by having these lavish parties, bring all these A-list celebrities, but somewhere in a back room or somewhere in another wing, horrible things were happening. So the fact that Prince Harry was there does not necessarily mean he was participating in what was happening. And just because you were at a party doesn't mean what's happening in every inch of the house. I mean, if you think about it, if the part is
present
thrown in a mansion,
and no longer has a
there are various
voice who will
floors and
pursue
wings.
justice
So
for her
it is
accusation.
completely possible that he
As of
was
the
there
taken against
and did
Diddy,
not participate.
no expansion
Now,
of the
you had said
investigation,
Prince
no
Andrew,
isolation
especially
orders,
as a result
no
of the
equipment
allegations that
access,
came out
no
in
suspension of
connection with the
attorney
EPC
communication.
case, that
Everything
they were close
inside
and that they
solitary
traveled
Block C
together,
continued as
and,
before.
there was
Everything
a person
except the
that
fear.
alleged that
If a
he
female
had,
warden can vanish
had
after a
sexually
single note,
assaulted
thing
her
except
while
the
she was
fear.
underage,
If a
that
female
would be a
warden can
different
vanish
story,
after
but
a single
Prince
note,
Harry and the way
ones
that
who
it was
once worked
mentioned
overnight
seemed
in
to
that
be very,
area.
again,
The ones
just
who
sort of
filed
trying
for
to
leave
bring
without giving a
legitimacy and
reason.
talk about
The ones
these
who
were the
saw
people
but
that
never
he-
spoke.
that Diddy-
No one
he
mentions the
surrounded
note,
himself by
but
to
everyone
protect
knows it
himself.
appeared.
Prince Harry
And if
has
what it
no
says is
criminal
true,
charges.
The
or
punishment.
even any
Part
accusations
3.
of illegal
The
activity
person no
that he
longer in
could
the
still
system.
see
The internal
inside of a
personnel
courtroom.
database of
In
the Atlanta
defamation
Federal
case,
Detention
it's
Center
possible
updated
that
its weekly
Prince Harry
roster.
may be able to
Under the
preserve his
category Special
reputation,
Personnel Code
and since
Adjustment,
it was such a
the name of
minuscule
Warden
mention
TD
in
was
the
marked as
greater
removed from
context
system
of
by
this filing,
administrative
he
order.
may be okay.
There was no decision number
Another
recorded. It
celebrity
was
mentioned in Lil
deactivated.
Rod's lawsuit
Her personal
is Young
contact
Miami,
information
who
disappeared
dated
from the
Diddy
internal
from
The
network
lawsuit,
exactly
Young
36
Miami's
hours
cousin
after she
assaulted Lil
filed her
Rod during the
complaint.
Thanksgiving
The change
holiday
log
in
was
2020.
executed from the
Similar to
system's
Prince Harry,
highest
there are no
access level
allegations
server,
against Young
a
Miami
device bearing
herself,
the
so
identifier
there's probably no worry of
DCCA1,
charges being
located in
filed
the
against
coordination
her,
office
but
on
there
the
could be
fourth floor
charges
of the
against some
Security
of the other
Administration
people
Wing.
listed in Lil Rod's lawsuit.
Only two
That's
individuals
people like
possess
Diddy's
the
chief of
authority to
staff,
perform
Christina
a
Coram,
system-level
who,
personnel
compares
removal
to
at that
Ghislaine
tier,
Maxwell,
the
the
head of
longtime
Federal Human
companion
Resources
of Jeffrey
and
Epstein.
Detention
Epstein
Center.
died by suicide
No
in 2019
confirmation
when he
exists
faced
as application
numerous
was made.
charges of sexual
The removal
assault
of
over
Warden
the course of
TD's
multiple
name was
years.
not accompanied by
Maxwell was
any
charged and
or
found
protective
guilty of sex
reassignment.
trafficking in
At
relation to her
11:20
time with
a.m., a
Epstein,
printed copy
and
of the
she is
personnel
currently serving
deployment
a
chart was
lengthy
generated
prison
in
sentence. Lil
preparation
Rod
for the
says
new week's
Christina
schedule.
Coram ordered
Under the
sex
section
workers and
marked Internal
prostitutes for
Alert,
Mr.
TD's
Comas, who
name
ordered and distributed ecstasy, cocaine, GHB, ketamine, marijuana, and mushrooms to Mr. Comas and his celebrity guests who were present on his rented yacht and his homes in Miami.
This is referenced in Diddy's indictment too,
Saying members and associates of the Combs enterprise, including high-ranking supervisors, security staff, household staff, staff personal assistants, and other Combs business employees facilitated the freak-offs by, among other things, booking hotel rooms for the freak-offs, stocking the hotel rooms in advance with the required freak-off supplies, including controlled substances, baby oil, lubricant, extra, linens, and lighting. Federal prosecutors also alleged these associates arranged travel for victims and commercial sex workers, delivered large sums of cash to Diddy to pay these sex workers, and even scheduled the delivery of IV fluid. So according to Melba, it's possible some of these associates are charged too. None of these cases, when you have these high-profile people that have been using people over years, these cases happen without a hand. Kelly had a handler, Epstein had a handler, Weinstein had a handler. Everybody has in those scenarios of those powerful people, powerful men that are abusing other people. They have someone that does their dirty work, and it's usually not only just one person, it's several people who may have different duties. So again, seeing this woman being his handler, being the person to get him drugs, being the person to procure sex workers for him, being the person to basically be on cleanup duty in case of covering up or silencing people that might want to come forward, that's not unusual. And she is also going to bear the brunt of criminal liability, just like Ghislaine Maxwell did, and basically had to take the entire brunt of the criminal justice system alone because
will
of the
leave you
fact that,
speechless. When the first images from the
Epstein
federal raid on
committed
Diddy's
suicide
$40
and
million
was not
Los
able
Angeles
to be
estate
held
were released,
accountable.
no one
And we
expected
can't
this.
talk about
Neatly
Diddy
stacked
without
in display
mentioning
cabinets
Cassie,
like
the
prized
one whose
possessions
lawsuit
were
blew the lid
200
off
bottles of baby
Diddy's
oil.
alleged
Right
scheme.
next to them,
She
over
filed civil
900
suit
bottles of
against
lubricant.
Diddy last
Rows and rows.
November
It
under
looked
the
less
New
like
York
a home
Survivor
and
Act,
more like a warehouse
meaning
for something
any
far more
sexual
disturbing.
assault
These
survivor
weren't the
could
kind of
file
items
suit
most people keep
against
in
their
bulk,
accused
but for
predator,
investigators,
and the
it painted
statute
a
of
chilling picture.
limitation
Why would
didn't
one of the
matter.
most powerful
Cassie's
men in hip
lawsuit
hop
was
need this
settled
much?
just one day
And more
after it was
importantly,
filed,
what
but
exactly
it was
were they
still
used
made
for?
public, dropping a laundry list of
It started
bombshells
with a
about
knock,
Diddy
then
that
a
the public
battering
hadn't
ram. On a
previously heard.
quiet morning
Cassie's
in March
lawsuit
2024,
outlined years of
Homeland
abuse by
Security
Diddy,
agents
starting
stormed
when
Sean
she was
Diddy
just
Combs' LA
19 years
mansion
old,
in the elite
and at
neighborhood
the
of Holmby
time he was
Hills.
37.
Not long
According
after,
to her
another team
suit,
hit his
Diddy was
Miami
prone
property
to
on the Glitzy Star
uncontrollable
Island.
rage and
These weren't just
frequently
casual
beat Cassie
searches, these were
savagely.
federal raids with
Cassie
helicopters
alleged
overhead,
Diddy forced her
agents
to
in full
use
tactical
drugs
gear,
and would
and entire
physically
blocks
beat
on
her
lockdown.
or
What were
force
they
her
looking
to have
for?
sex with
That question didn't
prostitutes.
stay
Then
unanswered for
there's the
long.
allegation
Inside
that
the
on
sprawling
at least two
17,000
occasions,
square foot
Diddy
mansion,
demanded
agents
Cassie
uncovered
hold
a
his
scene
gun
that
in her
left even
purse.
seasoned
The lawsuit
investigators
goes on to state,
and controlled
quote,
the sex
there was no clear
performances,
reason why
which he
Mr.
called
Comas
freak
required
offs,
her to hold his guns,
and he often
except to
electronically
reinforce to
recorded
his
them.
young
A
girlfriend
few
that
bottles.
he was
We're talking
violent,
hundreds.
powerful,
It looked
and
less like a
dangerous. This echoes a similar allegation made by Lil Rod about Jennifer Lopez's part in the 1999 New York nightclub shooting. Not only did Jennifer Lopez allegedly bring the gun to the club, now we're also looking at years later Cassie coming forward and saying that Diddy forced her to carry a gun with her when they went out to different events. So again, I think that this is more along the lines of when you look at this from a domestic violence lens, from the standpoint of the abuser being very controlling and demanding certain activities to prove loyalty to, basically put yourself in a bad situation. Only he can be the one to save you, basically. So in seeing that the parallels between JLo's experience and Cassie's experience, number one, it brings more credibility to what Cassie said in her pleadings, but also again, it causes us to look at Jennifer Lopez and be like some of the comments she made about the end of her relationship to Diddy in terms of, well, there was infidelity and, she kind of skirted the issue a bit. But when you start to look back at your comments, you start to think, oh, were you in a domestic violence relationship with Diddy, much like how Cass ended up in a domestic violence relationship with him? Cassie kind of broke the floodgate, so to speak, when she made her civil suit back in November. These crazy allegations, we'd never heard anything like it before, and then all of a sudden, we have several more people coming forward, and then more. It turns to 2024, so we have multiple plaintiffs who are coming forward alleging very similar things. I'm wondering, without these civil suits, would we even be here right now? Would Diddy even have been arrested and indicted? I really don't think so. I really don't think so, because Cassie's loss opened the floodgates, and I think it empowered other survivors to come forward and tell their story. And when Little Rod came forward, I think that was just another huge, just a huge moment in this case, because now you have male victims coming forward. And we know statistically male victims of sexual assaults generally don't report for a number of reasons, but they many times view it as an attack on their masculinity, and they're very concerned about how they would be viewed publicly. And Little Rod was brave, which I really commend his bravery in standing up and saying, listen, this what happened to me, and that empowered more and more folks to come forward, including most recently Danity K, one of the members of Danity Kane, stating that he had abused her and she had witnessed the abuse he had levied on others. So I think that all of these voices coming forward and saying, listen, there's something here. The feds took notice. And even though they may not have been public about it at first, we knew obviously when they searched the houses, we knew that this was getting very serious, but they were monitoring this the minute that Cassie filed her lawsuit. And when they read those allegations, I can assure you that investigation started immediately. And then as more and more survivors came forward, again, the feds would be going and interviewing each of those people, seeing what evidence they have. So for instance, do they have maybe some cell phone footage? Can they substantiate what occurred to them in other ways? Maybe follow-up text messages, emails. All of these things are aspects that we are able to use to now bring in their case in chief against P. Months ago, we reported that Cassie was working with federal investigators in the case against Diddy, and I can't know for sure whether she testified in the grand jury hearing that would ultimately indict Diddy, but it's likely at least some of his accusers did. I do believe that a number of the survivors would have testified. I don't think that they would have brought all of them because of the fact, number one, you want to testifying is traumatizing, especially when you're talking about the most awful day likely of your life and some very degrading things that happen to you, and you have to tell that to a bunch of people you don't know. So you have to be very cautious in when and how you bring your victims and your survivors to testify, and think about that in terms of your strategy, because again, you may want to save some of the survivors for the actual trial if this does go to trial, and maybe just pick one or two that make the point, right? And then you can fill it in with more evidence as the trial proceeds, but you don't necessarily have to show all of your evidence to the grand jury. You just pick the strongest pieces of evidence so that, again, you're not burning your survivors out before they get to the point of trial unnecessarily. Obviously, they do have to testify and, tell their story so that the jury has something to liberate on. But at the same token, you don't want to push them too much because, again, that trauma is very real. And even if they are getting assistance through counseling or something along those lines, still a lot to have to talk about it, especially in such a with the huge media frenzy around it. And, so many people weighing in, and whether it be social media or other celebrities or things like that. So those are some of the things if the assistant US attorney would have considering when deciding who should be brought in front of the grand jury to testify. And when it comes time for trial, we could expect to hear from Cassie or other accusers in federal court. You're bringing up a really good point because, as you said, this is probably one of the darkest times of these survivors' lives, and they have to come forward with these serious allegations and relive the trauma that I'm sure they've been working to overcome. It's really tough, but we're assuming that a lot of them are going to testify at the trial whenever that may be, and there are several accusers that will go through and do all of that. What would it look like at the trial then at the trial? Now, the key is the U.S. Attorney's Office has to make sure that they're not going too far afield with bad character evidence. We saw how that kind of backfired in the Harvey Weinstein case, where as well as Bill Cosby case, where other instances were brought in that were maybe not as close in
Present,
time or more so
and no
not
longer
really
has a
enlightening
voice
the
who will
jury
pursue
about what
justice
happened
for
in
her
the charges that
accusation.
were in the indictment,
As of
but
the
more
indictment
so
against
he's
Diddy,
just a really
no
bad,
expansion of the
horrible, predatory
investigation,
person.
no
That may
isolation
be the
orders,
truth. However,
no equipment
when it comes
access,
to
no
proving the
suspension of
charges
attorney
at hand,
communication.
you have to be
Everything
very
inside
focused on
solitary
making
block
sure
C
the jury
continued as before.
understands what
Everything
happened
except the
during
fear.
timeframes
If a
that are
female warden can
specified in the
vanish after a
indictment.
single
And
note,
so
nothing
if some
except
of
the
these
fear.
other
If a
survivors,
female
let's say
warden can
something
vanish after a
happened
single
10
note,
years ago,
ones
that
who
might
once
be
worked
too far
overnight
in
in
time
that
for them
area,
to be able to
the ones who
testify.
filed for
But
leave
if
without
we're
giving a
talking
reason,
about an
the ones
instance
who
of
saw but
something
never
that happened
spoke. No
last
one
year,
mentions
for
the
instance,
note,
that might
but
be
everyone
closer in
knows it
time to
appeared.
allow them to
And
be
if what
able
it
to
says is
testify.
true,
And again,
then
if
punishment.
they have
Part
specific
3.
knowledge about
The person
certain
no
aspects
longer
of
in
the
the system.
indictment,
The
of
internal
course they'll be
personnel
brought to
database of the
testify.
Atlanta
Then you
Federal
have to be
Detention
very
Center
cautious
updated its weekly
because you
roster.
wanna be able
Under
to
the
preserve,
category
if you're
Special
able to get
Personnel
a
Code
conviction,
Adjustment,
you
the
wanna be
name of
able
Warden
to
TD was marked
preserve
as
it
removed
on
from
appeal by
system
not
by
making these
administrative
types
order. There was no
errors
decision
after
number
his
recorded,
indictment.
but was
This week, Diddy
deactivated.
pleaded not
Her
guilty
personal
to all
contact
charges and
information
was denied
disappeared
bond
from the
twice. A
internal
statement
network
from
exactly
his legal
36
team
hours
reads,
after she
quote,
filed her
"Sha,
complaint.
Diddy
The
comes
changelog
is a
was
music
executed from the
icon,
system's
self-made
highest access level
entrepreneur, loving
server,
family
a
man,
device bearing the
unproven
identifier
philanthropist who has spent the
DCCA1,
last 30
located
years
in the
building an
coordination
empire,
office on the
adoring
4th
his
floor of the
children, and
Security
working to
Administration
uplift the
Wing.
Black community. He is an
Only
imperfect
2
person
individuals
that
possess
is
the
not
authority to
permitted to his
perform a
credit.
system-level
His
personnel
performance
removal
has
at
been
that
nothing
tier,
but
the head of
cooperative
Federal
with this
Human Resources
investigation,
and
he
Detention Center.
voluntarily relocated to New
No
York last
confirmation
week in
exists as
anticipation
patient
of
was
these
made.
charges.
The
Please
removal of
reserve your
Warden
judgment until
TD's
you
name
have
was
all
not
the facts.
accompanied by
These
any
are the acts
or
of an
protective
innocent man
reassignment.
with nothing to hide,
At
and he
11:20
forward to
a.m., a
clearing
printed
his
copy
name
of
in
the
court
personnel
more
deployment
updates
chart
are
was
sure to
generated
come
in
the case
preparation
of
for the new
United
week's
States
schedule.
versus Sha.
Under the
Diddy,
section
so
marked
make sure
Internal
to
Alert,
subscribe to our
TD's name
YouTube page so you don't miss a thing. Reporting for Law Crime, I'm Sierra.